The next paper, paper 2, Beyond the Rhetoric, Rethinking, Reach and Access of Olympiads and Competitions for Rural Learners. Mrs. K. Naidoo, Mrs. N. Dookie, and then Mrs. D. Malabo will do that. Speakers, are you ready? Are you?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Benjamin. It's Krishnie. If you'll allow me to share, please. Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. I just want to introduce the co-authors of this non-academic paper. It's Krishnie Naidoo. I'm the academic director at Eskom Expo for Young Scientists, and I'm also the current chair for STEMI. We have Mrs. Nalini Dookie, who is the provincial coordinator for KwaZulu-Natal, Eskom Expo for Young Scientists. And Mrs. Dorothy Mlambo is the center manager, the center being the Christoph Meyer Maths and Science Center. So I'm going to ask Nalini to just start off, please.
Thanks, Krishnie. Good afternoon, everyone. Krishnie, can you just start the slideshow? The benefits of participating in Olympiads and competitions have been widely documented and include the development of 21st century skills, such as communication, creativity, critical thinking, and collaboration. The question is, who should benefit from STEM Olympiads and competitions? While there are various definitions of rurality in South Africa, rural areas are often described as farms, long distances, and sparsely populated areas with limited economic activities and infrastructure. Our study focused on Christoph Meyer Maths and Science Center, which is located in the predominantly rural Umkhonyokude district in northern KwaZulu-Natal. The study was a response to reported low levels of participation in Olympiads and competitions, particularly in rural areas. The aim of the study was to establish, through the Christoph Meyer Maths and Science Center, the reach of Olympiads and competitions and learner engagements and their experiences. Krishnie will now take you through the conceptual and theoretical framework.
Thank you, Nalini. So we were mindful of the paradigms.
Sorry, would you like to just go do your presentation from the beginning, or do you want to show your other slides as well? Just click from the beginning, should you not? No, okay, no worries. Go
yeah, I just did, but for some reason.
Oh, okay, no worries.
Okay, there we go.
No worries. Okay.
All right, thank you. So we were mindful of the paradigms that are often used in research on rural areas. So we positioned our study within a strength-based paradigm, where strengths are recognized while acknowledging challenges. And as opposed to a deficit paradigm that would position rurality as the deficient other, the antithesis or opposite to urban, and as not being rural enough, and always discussed relative to urban. So we considered space as the physical dimension and place as the dynamic relationships between people, as well as between people and the space. Human agency recognizes our capacity to empower ourselves and others to become enablers and change makers. The cultural capital theory helps us understand how different types of capital, such as knowledge, skills, and resources, can reinforce inequality and determine the chances of learner success. Culture in this sense is not just about customs and the arts, etc. So this is dependent now, for example, on the family's educational background, or through objects and resources, or through institutions like the school. And with the social cognitive theory, we see that people are considered as producers as well as products of agentic transactions between people in social systems. I'll ask Nalini now to just take us through the method and some of our key findings.
Thanks, Krishnie. Using a qualitative approach, this small-scale study sampled 20 participants who completed open-ended questionnaires and were also interviewed. What we found for research question 1 in our findings, Krishnie, what we found was that through the center from 2017 to 2020, learners participated in the Astro Quiz, the ESCOM Expo, robotics, and a Maths Olympiad. The center provided access and facilitated reach through providing infrastructure and resources and coordinating activities. Some center staff were trained and also included in workshops. Some learners also returned to the center for assistance and use of the center resources. There was little to no feedback or follow-ups from Olympiads and competitions. For research question 2, we found that learners preferred the hands-on activities, robotics being the most popular, and it was not perceived as something unfamiliar or foreign. For Expo research, the learners determined the level of participation and the pace. Their research topics were related to their context. For example, an example of research on contaminated borehole water or polluted rivers and some social issues. But what they also needed was more guidance for open inquiry. For Astro Quiz, while most concepts were outside of their scope, it was not perceived as difficult. There were appropriate preparation materials, and the learners preferred the teamwork. For the Maths Olympiad, the learners found it to be difficult, including the preparation material. Some of the other challenges that we found that was experienced was the English language that was used, some unfamiliar concepts such as skateboards, lifts, sea level, unfamiliar with the structure and content of the Olympiad. Learners were also a bit demotivated by their failures. And the subject advisors and teachers mentioned a bit of learner disinterest, as them also were not aware of the different Olympiads and competitions.
I have white paper.
Oh, sorry, someone
Timing.
just switch off your microphone.
Timing was also an issue. Timing was also an issue with clashing the Olympiads clashing with exams, right? Thank you. Krishnie, will you take us through the discussion?
Thank you, Nalini. So we found that the Olympiads and competitions use the center to access and reach learners, as well as for its physical space, rather than a place for meaningful engagement. And hence the center were largely underutilized by the Olympiads and competitions. So once-off interventions are neither sustainable nor educationally or economically sound. There are various possibilities for strategic interventions, for example, using existing networks and structures in rural areas, as well as capacitating the human resources at science centers. Olympiads and competitions need to work within the system, where assessment, especially exit exams, are a priority. This we know is a reality. So the questions we must ask ourselves, are we in tune with learner interests and what motivates them? Is it sufficient to provide materials and practice questions and then encourage mass participation? So we can just tick a box. We need to rethink Olympiads and competitions that are conceptualized in urban areas for the urban context. The policy on rural education speaks of the importance of context and the problems associated with the one-size-fits-all. The policy also stresses the importance of equitable resourcing. Olympiads and competitions will always be exclusive if we focus only on the extension of the school syllabus and test how well learners understand university-level concepts. Is this what Olympiads and competitions should be about? Yet we are aware that most learners have not mastered basic concepts, and this is not just a problem in rural areas. So it is important for Olympiads and competitions to be benchmarked against international standards, but such standardization were done in very different contexts to our own. We cannot use a top-down approach, but we should build up and develop learners towards becoming internationally competitive. And Olympiads and competitions should contribute to educational attainment, which influences the cultural capital and in turn influences the educational attainment and so forth in a loop. We recommend changing the narrative on rural education. We need to interrogate traditional notions of Olympiads and competitions. We need to revisit the concept of Olympiads and competitions, and we need to move beyond just ticking boxes and stepping out of the cages that confine the current rhetoric on Olympiads and competitions. And if Olympiads and competitions are about standards, we need to ask ourselves, whose standards? And what are standards? And we need to remember that there's a difference between standards and quality. When it comes to standards, there is a misconception that the more difficult an Olympiad and competition is, it is of a higher standard. So we need to change our narrative. And the implementation of Olympiads and competitions need to be authentic and context-specific, sustainable, relevant, hands-on as well as minds-on, and of interest to learners. We need to ensure inclusivity, example, involve learners from a broader spectrum, teachers, subject advisors, and other education officials, other stakeholders, as well as younger learners and differentially able learners. We also need to motivate our learners through fun and positive experiences. And we heard Dr. Fenivesi speak of the Finnish approach of activity-based learning. And Finland, of course, being at the forefront and leaders in the education field. Our solutions must be reality-based. For example, consider the context, consider the realities of poor learner content knowledge. So how is it that we work with these realities? And with an appropriate approach and the necessary support, hubs such as the Christoph Meyer Maths and Science Center have the potential to change the landscape of Olympiads and competitions in rural area. And finally, we hope that we have at least reopened the conversations on Olympiads and competitions in rural areas. And we have challenged you by asking some difficult questions, making some uncomfortable statements, especially now that we have been forced to teach and learn online. What does it mean for Olympiads and competitions? It was quite encouraging to hear Mr. Isaac Ramova's announcement that the Department of Science and Innovation will be taking this forward through the Transformation Charter. And a lot of what we said have been touched on by speakers before us, and we are aware that, we are aware of these issues. So now what we've done is that we've produced some data and evidence for it. I would like to say thank you on behalf of Dorothy Alambo and Nalini Dookie. You're welcome to unmute and conclude. Thank you very much. That brings to the end our presentation.